So in the last video, we covered the small intestine. So now we're going to move on to the large intestine. So as you'll notice, the large intestine actually surrounds the small intestine to the outside. And the ileum would dump chyme into the large intestine here. And so from this point, the chyme would be moved upward. So this is called the ascending colon. And then right here, the colon changes direction. So this is a curvature or a flexure. Since it's associated with the liver, we call this the hepatic flexure. And then we go across the abdomen with the transverse colon to over on this side. And if I remove the breastplate, then what we'd see is there's an organ that we can see right here, which is the spleen. So then this curvature is called the splenic flexure. And then from there, in the transverse colon, we convert the chyme into feces, and then it moves through the rest of the transverse colon to the descending colon, which we see here. Now, if we remove the small intestine from this model, what we'll see is at the bottom of the descending colon, the colon has to curve and come back midline to the rectum. So this curved portion that curves and then comes downward here is the sigmoid colon, which then terminates in the rectum here at the bottom. So what organizes the large intestine is this sheet of connective tissue that we see throughout here. And so if you'll recall from the small intestine that the sheet of connective tissue is called the mesentery. So we're going to use the first part of that word, mes, so meso, and then we're going to incorporate the common name for the structure of the colon. So this broad sheet of connective tissue we see here is called the mesocolon. And then if you look right here, we have an extension off of the large intestine, which is the appendix. And the connective tissue is associated with the appendix as well. So if this is the mesocolon, then the connective tissue associated with this becomes the mesoappendix to define its location as well. So if you look at where the small and large intestine come together, then what we actually see is here's the ileum, and so we would have a sphincter here that would control the emptying of the small intestine into the large intestine, which is the ileocecal sphincter. And what you'll notice is that it actually enters above this structure, which then is below it. So because this is below the main flow pattern for the chyme, then this is essentially a blind sac. And so a blind sac is referred to as a cecum. And so this little cavity here is called the cecum, and then the appendix comes off of that. So let's go to this one now. So while we're looking at the large intestine, you'll notice that the large intestine is compartmentalized. And throughout the digestive system, we have an elaborate folding pattern that greatly increases surface area and allows us to do digestion and absorption. So the individual little pouches that make up the large intestine are called haustra. And what happens is chyme churns around in here for a while and then moves to the next one, churns around, then moves to the next one, churns around and moves to the next one. So that's called haustral churning. And then eventually, as the feces forms here and moves down, then as the feces enters the rectum, it's actually in the shape of haustra in little balls. And then as the little balls of feces build up in the rectum, the pressure compresses it together. So that with a normal stool, we don't have the shape of the haustra. But if people become really dehydrated, they will actually have feces in the form of little balls, which will be the shape of their haustra. And we see that in other animals that significantly dehydrate their feces in deer and elk and moose and horses and other animals. So what you're always seeing is the shape of their haustra. Now what helps retain the shape of the haustra is this white band. And the white band is called the tinea coli. And tinea is a genus for a tapeworm. And a tapeworm is a white worm that's long and flat like this. And so when they first saw this in early dissections, what it reminded them of was a tapeworm, which they had been used to seeing because at that point in human history, almost everybody was parasiticized. So they all have parasites that you would pass in your stool every once in a while. And so that's probably where that name came from. And then associated with this Tinea coli, we usually adhere kind of fat packets that we can see throughout here, the yellow things. And then those are called epiploic appendages. So kind of in review real quick, when we look at the large intestine, we have a cecum, and extending off the cecum would be an appendix. And then we have an ascending colon, a hepatic flexure, transverse colon, splenic flexure, descending colon, sigmoid colon, and then the last portion of the colon is the rectum, which is a storage area for fecal material. And then the opening to the outside is your anus. So as it tapers here, it's called the anal canal. And what we have in our anal canal are ridges, which we call anal columns, and then depressions between the ridges, which we call anal sinuses. And that's just a classic pattern of having epithelial tissue that can be stretched so that you have folding to it. And then just inside the anus, we have a vascular network right here. And then when this tissue becomes damaged, then that's what creates hemorrhoids, or these hemorrhoidal veins right here.